What if the eggs from your own backyard hens started coming out a color no egg has ever been? Not brown, not white, not even the pale blue you sometimes see online. Green. And what if the scientists who came to explain it away couldn't fully explain it at all?
This isn't a folk tale passed down in some village. It's a real event reported by real news outlets involving a real research university.
It happened to a quiet farmer in southern India who just wanted to feed his family. What started with one strange egg would end up baffling an entire team of poultry scientists, spreading across social media in every language, and turning an ordinary man into an accidental celebrity.
And the strangest part? By the end of this story, the mystery still isn't completely solved. Stick around, because I promise this one gets stranger the deeper you go.
We're talking university researchers, laboratory testing, and a farmer who refused to let a single stranger eat one of these eggs until he knew for certain it was safe. This is a story about curiosity, patience, and what happens when science meets something it genuinely doesn't expect to see. Meet A.K. Shihabuddin, a poultry farmer from Malappuram in the Indian state of Kerala. His mornings followed the same rhythm they always had. Walk out to the coop, gather the eggs, start the day. Nothing about that particular morning suggested anything was about to change, until he cracked one open. Instead of the familiar golden yolk he'd seen every single day of his farming life, something else spilled into the bowl. A deep, unmistakable green. Not a pale tint you could talk yourself out of. Not a trick of the kitchen light. Green, the way you'd expect from a chemistry set, not a chicken coop. He called his wife over. She stood in the doorway and stared at it, just as long as he did. Neither of them quite sure what they were looking at, or whether it was even safe to be standing this close to it. They didn't eat it. Not that day, and not for a long time after. Instead, they did what any careful farmer would do. They waited, they watched, and they hoped it was a one-time fluke. It wasn't. The green yolks kept coming, not from just one hen, but from several, week after week. Then, month after month. For nearly 9 months, Shihabuddin and his family quietly lived alongside this mystery, unsure whether to be amazed by it or genuinely worried. At one point, they even set aside some of the strange eggs to incubate instead of eat, half hoping the chicks would offer some kind of clue. When the chicks hatched, they were healthy, completely normal, at least on the outside. For a moment, that felt like reassurance. But the hens that had laid those very chicks kept right on producing green yolked eggs, as if nothing had been resolved at all. Word started to spread through the village long before it ever reached the internet. Neighbors came by to see for themselves. Vendors at the local market heard the rumor and wanted proof. Some people treated it almost like a good omen, a strange kind of luck landing on Shihabuddin's farm. Others weren't so sure and quietly wondered if something was wrong with the flock or worse, with the land itself. Through all of it, Shihabuddin held on to one rule. Nobody was eating these eggs until somebody with real expertise could tell him they were safe. Not curious neighbors, not the vendors offering to buy a few, just to see what all the fuss was about. Not even his own family, no matter how many days passed without anything going wrong. Eventually, Shihabuddin did what most of us would probably do with something this strange sitting in our kitchen. He posted it. Photos and videos of the green yolked eggs went up on Facebook, and within days, this wasn't a local curiosity anymore. It was a global one. Comment sections filled up fast and not with agreement. Some people were convinced it had to be pollution. Others floated theories about radiation or genetic mutation, or, only half-jokingly, aliens. A few were sure the whole thing was staged for clicks. But somewhere in that flood of attention, word of the eggs reached the people who could actually offer a real answer. Researchers at the Kerala Veterinary and Animal Sciences University, known locally as KVASU, one of the region's leading centers for poultry science. A team led by Dr. S. Sankaralingam from the university's Poultry Science Department drove out to the farm to see the phenomenon firsthand. They examined the hens one by one. They inspected the coop and the surrounding land. They collected feed samples, water samples, and a batch of the strange eggs to bring back to the lab. For Shihabuddin, watching trained scientists take his backyard mystery seriously was its own kind of relief. For 9 months, this had lived in the space between village gossip and internet speculation. Now, finally, it belonged to people trained to actually find an answer. Whatever was happening, at least someone with real credentials was looking for it. The team didn't rush. Poultry science, it turns out, doesn't move at the speed of a viral post. They ran tests. They cross-checked feed samples against known compounds. They compared healthy hens against the ones producing the strange eggs, looking for any difference in behavior, appearance, or diet that might explain what was happening. The team's first working theory was diet, and it turned out to be at least partly right. Shihabuddin admitted that alongside the usual feed, he'd been supplementing his hen's diet with a homemade mix of natural herbs and plants he gathered himself, things like kuruntoti, a plant common in Kerala backyards that many locals believe is good for livestock health. When the researchers switched the hens over to a standardized university feed, something started to shift. Within about 2 weeks, the yolks began changing. Green faded to olive. Olive faded to a normal, familiar yellow.
Case closed, right? That's what everyone assumed. But it's not quite where the story ends.
When Dr. Sankaralingam's team studied the hens more closely, they found something they hadn't expected: green pigment stored in the fat deposits directly beneath the bird's skin. That detail told them the responsible compound had to be fat-soluble, which explained how it had slowly built up inside the hens over time and made its way into the yolk.
But here's the part that still doesn't have a clean, confirmed answer. To this day, the exact source of that pigment has never been officially proven.
The herbs remain the leading theory, the most likely explanation researchers could point to.
But nobody has definitively confirmed it, which means, technically, this mystery didn't end with a tidy scientific explanation. It ended with an educated, well-informed guess that happened to work.
Not a dramatic reveal, but a best explanation, tested and accepted, even without every last question answered. For Shihabuddin, it was enough. His hens weren't sick. There was no contamination, no toxin, nothing dangerous lurking in his coop. Whatever compound had been at work, it had simply worked its way harmlessly through the bird systems and out again once the diet changed. Relief, it turned out, didn't need a perfect explanation. It just needed a safe one. He worked with the university to redesign his flock's diet going forward, trading his own homemade herbal mix for something tested and standardized. It wasn't the ending he expected when he first cracked open that strange green egg all those months earlier, but it was the one his family needed.
You'd think that would be the end of the story. A relieved farmer back to collecting ordinary yellow-yolked eggs, life returning to normal. Instead, this was really just the beginning of something else entirely.
Word of the green egg farm spread almost as fast as the original mystery had. Curious visitors started showing up in person, hoping to see the phenomenon for themselves before it faded completely. Local TV crews came out to film segments. Shihabuddin, once just a farmer, quietly trying to understand his own hens, found himself explaining fat-soluble pigments and university research to reporters and strangers who'd traveled specifically to meet him. What had genuinely frightened his family for 9 straight months became the very thing that put their small farm on the map. Requests started coming in from people who wanted to see the rare eggs, and even from a few who wanted to buy them. Shihabuddin began fielding calls directly, sharing his own number online for anyone curious enough to ask.
It's a strange kind of ending when you think about it. A problem that once felt like it might cost a family everything ended up becoming their most valuable asset. And maybe that's the part of this story worth sitting with a little longer. Something that looks alarming at first, something that doesn't make sense yet, isn't always a disaster waiting to happen. Sometimes it's just a question that hasn't found the right person to ask it yet.
Shihabuddin never set out to become known for anything. He was just a farmer trying to figure out why his hens were suddenly behaving like no hens he'd ever raised. But that willingness to ask for help, instead of quietly hoping the problem would disappear on its own, is really what turned this from a private worry into a story worth telling at all.
So here's my question for you. Have you ever come across something so strange you almost didn't trust your own eyes? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story kept you hooked all the way to the end, there are plenty more just like it waiting for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.